Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1: Arrival at the Scene. The morning was damp and overcast, the kind of grey that seemed to settle into the bones. A thin mist clung to the London streets, curling around the cobblestones and blurring the outlines of the buildings. Yet, even against the gloom, Hercule Poirot advanced with his usual elegance, his bowler hat perched precisely atop his head, polished shoes clicking in perfect rhythm on the wet stone, and his moustache, the pride of his countenance, immaculate as ever. The little grey cells within his head were already active, anticipating the puzzle awaiting him. The summons from Scotland Yard had come the previous evening, brief and formal. A body had been discovered at Eldridge and Company, a factory known for its high-quality textiles, and Inspector Hastings would accompany him. Poirot did not travel lightly to a scene of death. For him, it was not mere curiosity, it was an obligation to uncover the truth hidden beneath appearances. As Poirot approached the factory, the iron gates creaked open to reveal a yard glistening with moisture. Stacks of crates, some labelled, others blank, were scattered across the space, like silent sentinels of a hidden world. The smell of wool, oil, and damp wood filled the air, mingling with a faint tang of something more sinister that Poirot could not immediately name. He paused, observing the environment. "Ah, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice smooth but edged with intensity. "Notice, mon ami, how every object, every mark, may hold a secret. Even the ordinary can conceal the extraordinary. One must observe with precision, n'est-ce pas?" Hastings, slightly damp and more accustomed to the chaos of traditional crime scenes, nodded. "Yes, Poirot. It's grim, though. I confess, seeing a body in a place like this unsettles me more than in a private home." Poirot's eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over the yard. "And yet, my friend, it is precisely because of its ordinariness that the extraordinary can be discovered. Let us enter with care." The warehouse doors were ajar, revealing darkness within. A faint ray of sunlight penetrated the dusty air, catching particles that floated like tiny motes of evidence suspended in time. Poirot moved forward, his hand brushing against a railing, noting the texture of the wood, the wear of the metal hinges. Each detail, he understood, could prove invaluable. Inside, the scene was both chaotic and meticulously staged. Crates were overturned, their contents partially spilled, bolts of wool, boxes of thread, and machinery parts lay scattered. And there, amid the clutter, lay Mr. Leonard Ashford, the factory manager. His body was sprawled beside a stack of crates, his eyes open in a frozen expression of surprise, his hands splayed unnaturally. Poirot knelt with the care of a man performing a delicate ritual, inspecting the position of the limbs, the orientation of the body, and the surrounding environment. Hastings noticed the lack of a struggle. There are no signs that he attempted to defend himself. "Ah, but that is significant, yes. It suggests the murderer acted with cunning, perhaps exploiting a moment when Mr. Ashford was unaware, vulnerable." Hastings knelt beside him, his brow furrowed. "But how could anyone get in here without being seen? The factory has guards, night shifts." Poirot waved a hand gracefully. "The human mind, Hastings, is far more revealing than any lock or door. Observe the ladder, fallen, yet positioned deliberately, not as if merely toppled. And here, he pointed to a faint smudge on the floor, a liquid, dark and viscous, partially wiped. Perhaps a dropped container, perhaps blood. Every detail must be considered." Poirot rose slowly, his eye scanning the gathered employees at the edge of the warehouse. Their faces were pale, some attempting to mask fear with composure, others trembling at the sight. Each movement, each gesture, was a potential clue. Poirot's gaze lingered on subtle tells, a finger nervously twirling a ring, a lip pressed tightly in thought, eyes darting to avoid his own. One figure, a seamstress with sharp features and an alert expression, seemed particularly uneasy. Another, the night watchman, avoided eye contact entirely. Poirot filed these observations away in his mind. Every individual has a rhythm, a truth hidden beneath the surface, he murmured to Hastings. One must detect the smallest hesitation, the tiniest contradiction. The inspector approached, holding a notebook. Poirot, witnesses say no one saw anything last night. Doors were locked. The security log is clear. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, his moustache twitching in concentration. Ah, Hastings, the absence of evidence is itself evidence. A clever murderer anticipates observation, yes, but cannot anticipate the little grey cells, which notice what is overlooked. Now, Miss Amis, we must examine the body more closely. He crouched once more, gently lifting Mr. Ashford's wrist to check for irregularities, though careful not to disturb anything unnecessarily. He noted the faint marks around the neck and wrists, the angle of the head, and the alignment of the shoulders. Hastings, see here, a slight discoloration beneath the fingernails. And here, a mark almost invisible on the forearm. A struggle, yes, but subtle, as though brief and desperate. Ah, but there is more. Poirot's gaze drifted to the surrounding crates and machinery. A faint footprint caught his attention, partially obscured by spilled material. Its size suggested an adult male, yet the depth and pattern revealed something unusual. Poirot squatted and studied it, tracing the contour with a gloved finger. Not quite matching any ordinary boot. The killer wears something to disguise, perhaps? Or is attempting misdirection? Ah, clever, very clever. At that moment, the factory owner, a tall, imposing man with an anxious expression, entered the warehouse, flanked by police officers. Monsieur Poirot, he said hurriedly, I cannot understand, why would anyone harm Leonard? He was loyal, diligent. Who would do such a thing? Poirot turned, offering a gentle smile. Monsieur, loyalty is admirable, yet human motives are rarely simple. There is always desire, fear, or desperation at play. It is our task to uncover it, yes, to strip away the layers of deceit until the truth is revealed. The factory owner's eyes darted nervously. But the warehouse, it is secure. Only a handful of people have access. Precisely, Poirot said, nodding. And therein lies the beginning of the puzzle. Security, familiarity, routine, all exploited by those who wish to conceal their intentions. We must now speak to the individuals who had the opportunity. Observation, Hastings, observation. Every word, every hesitation, every gesture may hide the key to the crime. Poirot rose elegantly, brushing dust from his coat. Come, mon ami. Let us begin the interviews. The little grey cells are impatient, and time is of the essence. The body may speak not in words, but in the language of signs, and we must listen with utmost care. As they walked toward the gathered employees, the damp light of the warehouse catching on the stacks of crates, Poirot's mind was already at work, connecting the faint traces, the subtle inconsistencies, the hidden truths. He knew that within this ordinary factory, amid its shadows and clutter, lay a tale of ambition, betrayal, and perhaps murder, and he alone had the skill, patience, and psychological insight to unravel it. And so, Hercule Poirot's investigation began, meticulous, elegant, and inexorably precise, a master at work within the quiet chaos of Eldridge and Company's warehouse. Chapter 2, The Victim and the Warehouse. The warehouse of Eldridge and Company was a cavernous structure, its high ceiling supported by thick beams of timber that creaked faintly under the weight of years and weather. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the dusty air, creating a muted, almost ethereal glow around the stacks of crates, rolls of fabric, and various machinery that populated the room. It was in this muted labyrinth of materials that the tragedy had occurred, a tragedy that now demanded the full attention of Hercule Poirot and his little grey cells. Poirot moved carefully among the crates, observing each detail with methodical precision. The body of Mr. Leonard Ashford had been examined once already by Scotland Yard, yet Poirot knew the mind of a true detective sees far beyond the surface. "Hastings," he murmured, "observe the position of the body. Not merely where it lies, but how it lies. The arrangement of limbs, the orientation of the head, the angle of the shoulders, all speak to a story untold, yes, a story frozen in time." Hastings bent closer to the sprawled figure. "He seems peaceful, almost. As if he simply collapsed." Poirot shook his head, his moustache twitching slightly. "Mon ami, appearances are deceiving. There is a subtle tension even in death. Notice the slight stiffening of the fingers. A mark on the forearm. The way the head tilts to one side, not accidental. These signs, though quiet, speak volumes. Our friend Leonard did not simply collapse, he was confronted, perhaps surprised, and the end came swiftly." The detective's eyes wandered over the surrounding floor. Amid the scattered crates, he noted a faint, dark smudge, a liquid of uncertain origin, and the light, almost imperceptible footprints leading toward a side door. Each step, each mark, was a word in the silent testimony of the warehouse. Poirot crouched and examined the footprints closely. Small, light tread, yet deep enough to suggest determination. Whoever made this mark was careful, deliberate, yet in a hurry. Ah, Hastings, the mind of a criminal is like a spider's web, intricate, precise, but sometimes a single misstep reveals everything. The warehouse itself held countless possibilities for concealment and misdirection. Some crates were labeled with their contents, rolls of wool, bales of cotton, while others were blank, anonymous, perhaps deliberately so. Poirot ran his gloved fingers along a crate corner, noting a faint smear of a substance he could not immediately identify. He sniffed subtly. Ah, a hint of dye, blue, recently applied. Aha! A clue. Perhaps a worker, perhaps someone attempting misdirection. We shall see. Poirot then turned his attention to the machinery. Looms and presses sat idle, dust gathering over their surfaces, yet each bore marks of recent use. A small wrench lay abandoned, almost hidden behind a crate. Not misplaced, none, Poirot said softly. Left deliberately, or dropped in haste. The mind of the criminal often leaves what it thinks insignificant. But nothing is insignificant. Hastings, pacing the edge of the scene, spoke quietly. Poirot, I cannot see how anyone could have done this without being seen. The warehouse is large, yes, but the staff work in shifts. Guards, night watchmen. Poirot's sharp eyes met Hastings' gaze. Ah, Hastings, never underestimate the ingenuity of human cunning. The criminal need not be invisible, only clever in knowing when and where to act. Observe also the workers. Every gesture, every hesitation, may hide a secret. Even fear leaves a trace, subtle yet undeniable to those trained to see. As if on cue, a group of employees had been gathered in the small office adjacent to the warehouse. Poirot glanced at them through the open doorway. There was the seamstress Margaret Linton, her hands wringing the edge of her apron, Thomas Greaves, assistant manager, who stood with arms crossed, a slight tension in his jaw, Samuel Doyle, the night watchman, whose eyes darted nervously around the room, and Mrs. Clara Ashford, the widow, whose calm composure seemed almost too controlled. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, noting the tight press of her lips and the occasional tremor in her fingers. Subtle, yet telling. Poirot moved back to the body, crouching near a fallen crate. Notice, Hastings, the ladder, he said, pointing to the metal frame that had toppled slightly onto the floor. It did not simply fall. Its position suggests it was moved, deliberately or as part of a struggle. And see here, a fragment of paper, partially torn. A note, perhaps, overlooked, yet containing the potential of revelation. Hastings leaned over. It seems mundane, a shipping list, perhaps. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Mon ami, nothing is mundane. Observe closely. The note mentions a shipment, but in a manner inconsistent with ordinary entries. Some words are abbreviated differently. Perhaps a cipher, perhaps a hurried record. In any case, it must be preserved. The detective then examined the surrounding area for further traces, scuff marks along the floorboards, faint impressions in the dust, and a peculiar scent lingering near a stack of crates. Poirot inhaled lightly. Hastings, do you smell it? Bitter almonds. Subtle, yet unmistakable. Cyanide. Or some chemical designed to mimic it. A warning, perhaps, or a clue left inadvertently. We must note everything, even the smallest detail, for it is in these details that the truth hides. Poirot straightened, his keen eyes scanning the warehouse from end to end. Ah, the architecture of crime, he murmured. Every crate, every walkway, every shadow is a participant. A murderer thinks only of concealment, yet in doing so, leaves patterns for the observant mind. We must follow the pattern, not merely the obvious. Hastings looked uneasy. It is overwhelming, Poirot. How do you even begin to make sense of it? Poirot smiled faintly, a curl of amusement in his moustache. Hastings, one does not begin with the obvious. One begins with patience, observation, and deduction. The warehouse is a canvas, each object a stroke, each mark a message. And our role is to read the painting, to understand the hand that created it. The detective then turned to the employees. We must speak with each of you, he said calmly, his voice carrying authority without accusation. Every word you speak, every hesitation you display, is a clue. Do not think you can conceal anything from observation. Mon ami, the mind leaves traces as indelible as ink. Mrs. Ashford rose, her voice steady but soft. Detective, why involve the staff? Surely we are all devastated by Leonard's death. We can hardly be suspects. Poirot's eyes, sharp and discerning, studied her closely. Madam, it is not accusation that guides me, but understanding. Even those most grieved may inadvertently reveal information. There is no blame yet, only observation. Only truth. As the group began to speak, Poirot listened with a patience that seemed almost supernatural. He noted the patterns of speech, the choice of words, the fleeting gestures. Margaret Linton's hands, so meticulous in her work, betrayed attention she could not fully conceal. Grieve's insistence on discussing routine schedules hinted at a preoccupation with alibis. Doyle's eyes betrayed fear, yet perhaps of suspicion rather than guilt. And Mrs. Ashford's composure, though outwardly perfect, concealed micro-expressions that suggested knowledge she was reluctant to reveal. Poirot moved among them with a quiet elegance, asking pointed questions yet listening more than speaking. Tell me, Miss Amis, he said, what happened last night? Every detail, however minor, may illuminate the path to truth. And so, the investigation began in earnest. In the cavernous warehouse, amid crates, dust, and faint traces of deception, Hercule Poirot's mind worked tirelessly, weaving together observation, psychology, and logic. Every shadow held a clue, every gesture, a possible revelation. The warehouse was no longer a simple storage space, it was a stage upon which human motives, fears, and secrets were subtly displayed. For Poirot, the task was clear: decipher the hidden narrative before him, uncover the murderer among the seemingly innocent, and bring order to chaos, as only he could. Chapter 3: The suspects gathered. By mid-morning, the warehouse had been cordoned off, the area cleared of crates and machinery that could be disturbed, and the employees gathered in the small office adjacent to the factory floor. Poirot and Hastings entered, their presence commanding attention without any need for raised voices. Poirot's eye swept over the assembled group. The four individuals he had identified as primary subjects of interest now stood before him. Each carried a story of their own, and Poirot knew that even the most casual expression, gesture, or hesitation could provide the smallest fragment of truth. First, there was Mrs. Clara Ashford, widow of the deceased. She was tall, poised, and impeccably dressed for the dreary morning. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, her gaze steady, yet Poirot noticed a flicker of tension in her eyes and a subtle tightening of her jaw. A woman accustomed to control, yet, perhaps, secretly rattled by the morning's events. Next, Thomas Greaves, the assistant manager, stood with an air of authority. His posture was straight, shoulders squared, and hands clasped behind his back. Yet, Poirot noted the subtle tremor in his fingers, betraying nerves that contrasted with his outward composure. Ambition was written on his face, Poirot observed, a man who would welcome advancement, perhaps even at a cost that others would consider immoral. Then came Margaret Linton, a seamstress of meticulous habits. Her hair was pulled tightly back, her apron spotless, though Poirot's keen eye caught a faint smudge of blue dye on one cuff. Her eyes were bright but wary, scanning the room as if expecting betrayal at every corner. Hastings commented quietly, "She seems on edge. Do you think she's hiding something?" Poirot's expression remained neutral. "Patience, Hastings. Nervousness is not proof of guilt. Yet it is an instrument of observation." Finally, Samuel Doyle, the night watchman, a man of broad frame and quiet manner, shifted uneasily on his feet. His eyes avoided direct contact, and his hands twitched slightly as though he might be concealing something. "Perhaps he is merely frightened," Hastings suggested. Poirot's gaze, sharp as a hawk's, did not waver. Fear, mon ami, is a language. And in every language, there are words we may overlook if we are inattentive. Poirot took a deep breath and began, speaking calmly yet with unmistakable authority. "Miss Amos, Leonard Ashford was a man of precision, integrity, and diligence. Yet, last night, he met an untimely end, and our task is to understand why and how. To do so, we must speak honestly and observe truthfully." Mrs. Ashford's voice was quiet but firm. "Detective, what do you hope to discover here? Surely no one among us could have." Poirot interrupted gently. "Madam, accusation is not my purpose. Observation, understanding, and justice, that is all. I seek only the truth." He began with the widow. "Madam Ashford, please recount your evening yesterday. Every movement, however minor. Do not omit details that seem trivial. They may illuminate the unseen." Mrs. Ashford adjusted her gloves and spoke. "I retired early to my rooms at 8 o'clock. Leonard was working late, as he often did. I heard nothing unusual. When the morning came, the news. I can scarcely bear it." Her voice quivered slightly, yet her eyes remained composed. Poirot made a note of the slight tremor, a detail that might indicate stress or concealment. Thomas Greaves stepped forward. "I was overseeing the final inventory of the shipments last night. I went through the warehouse at intervals, ensuring everything was accounted for. I left around midnight. I did not see anyone unusual, nor hear anything untoward." His tone was confident, yet Poirot noted a subtle contradiction in his timeline when compared to the night watchman's account, which Doyle would provide shortly. Margaret Linton was next. "I was in the textile room, working on mending some of the rolls of fabric. I do not leave the area except at breaks. I heard nothing." Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her apron, exposing a small smudge of blue dye on her cuff, an observation Poirot stored carefully. Small details, seemingly insignificant, could prove invaluable. Finally, Doyle spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "I was asleep in my quarters, near the warehouse entrance. I only discovered the body at dawn. I swear I did not leave my post." Yet Poirot noticed the way his boots were slightly scuffed, and the faint impressions in the dust leading to a side door. A careful man, perhaps, but not entirely truthful. Poirot moved gracefully among them, asking gentle, probing questions. "Miss Amos, let us consider the warehouse itself. Who had access to the side door? Who can confirm the times of their movements?" Greaves responded first, a hint of defensiveness in his voice. "Only senior staff, really. Security is strict. Doyle has keys, of course, and Leonard had access at all hours." Poirot tilted his head, noting the defensiveness. "And the others? Madame Ashford, Margaret? Were there any circumstances in which you might have entered?" Mrs. Ashford shook her head. "Only if Leonard summoned me. Otherwise, never." Margaret's gaze flickered toward the smudged cuff. I do not leave my work area at night." Poirot's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in keen observation. Hastings noticed the micro-expressions. A hesitation here, a glance there. Such details speak, though words may deceive. "And Doyle, your recollection of sleeping through the night, can anyone corroborate it?" Doyle hesitated. "No. I am the only one in the watch quarters." Poirot tapped his fingers together lightly. Opportunity. A key element in the puzzle. Yet opportunity alone does not make guilt. We must consider motive, method, and subtle traces left behind. He turned to Hastings. "My friend, observe the small inconsistencies. Greaves' timeline does not align perfectly with Doyle's account. Margaret's blue dye, and Madame Ashford's subtle tension. We are not yet at revelation, but we are observing, and that is the first step." Poirot's gaze returned to the warehouse, now visible through the open office door. Notice the arrangement of crates, the fallen ladder, the smudge of liquid on the floor. All these elements were not accidental. The murderer is clever, but cleverness cannot erase the traces left behind by human activity. Hastings frowned. "Poirot, it feels as if everyone here is hiding something. How can we know whom to trust?" Poirot's eyes sparkled with quiet amusement. "Hastings, one does not rush to judgment. One observes, one records, one analyses. The truth is a tapestry woven from many threads, and the threads are here, in these gestures, these words, these pauses. Patience, and the mind must work like a surgeon's hand." He returned to the gathered employees. "Now, Miss Amos, I will ask you again, consider your movements yesterday evening. Every step, every conversation. Every sound you may have heard. Nothing is too small to matter. The solution will not be found in assumptions, but in details. And it is in the details that I shall discover the truth." As the interviews proceeded, Poirot's mind worked tirelessly, forming mental maps of movements, timelines, and subtle contradictions. Each individual seemed ordinary, yet each carried potential threads of guilt, fear, or complicity. The detective understood that the murderer's cunning lay not only in opportunity but in the careful orchestration of appearances. And it was Poirot's task to untangle that orchestration with precision, patience, and the unerring application of his psychological insight. By the end of the morning, the first layer of observation was complete. The suspects had been questioned, their gestures recorded, their statements compared, and early discrepancies noted. Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, connecting subtle inconsistencies to a pattern not yet visible to others. The warehouse, quiet and looming in the background, seemed almost to pulse with secrets, and Poirot felt a thrill of anticipation. Within those walls, amid crates, fabric, and shadows, the story of Leonard Ashford's death lay waiting to be discovered. And Hercule Poirot, with his methodical elegance, was ready to uncover it, thread by thread. Chapter 4: Clues and Red Herrings. The afternoon sun struggled to penetrate the thick clouds above London, casting a dim, silvery light across the factory yard of Eldridge and Company. Inside the warehouse, Poirot moved with his usual calm, deliberate pace. His sharp eyes scanned every corner, every crate, every trace of material, as though the very walls might whisper secrets to him. "Hastings," Poirot said softly, his voice carrying that precise blend of curiosity and authority that always demanded attention. "One must never underestimate the subtleties, the whisperings of evidence that are almost invisible. The human mind, in its haste or its cleverness, leaves traces that only a patient observer can detect." Hastings, ever loyal and somewhat impatient, frowned. "But Poirot, we have already interviewed the staff, observed the scene, and noted the footprints. How much more is there to find?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with mild amusement. "Ah, mon ami, the footprints you observed are but the beginning. There are layers beneath layers. Clues hidden in plain sight, and others masked by deliberate deception. The first are opportunities, the second, distractions. And the murderer has indeed created distractions. Observe, Hastings, observe carefully." Poirot began a systematic examination of the warehouse. First, he approached the fallen ladder near the center of the room. Its position, tilted against a stack of crates, suggested it had been used recently. Poirot knelt and traced his gloved fingers along the rungs, noting a faint smear of dark substance, perhaps grease, perhaps blood. He sniffed carefully. Neither oil nor dirt, mon ami. Something organic, yes, but diluted. Perhaps the assailant wiped the object in haste. A clue, subtle, yet meaningful. Next, Poirot's attention shifted to a faint trail of blue dye along the edge of a crate. "I see, Hastings," he murmured. "Observe this smudge. It is recent, not part of the ordinary factory operations. Someone brushed against the crate, or attempted to cover their movement. The color, unmistakably the shade of Margaret Linton's work uniform. Coincidence? Perhaps, yet one must never ignore coincidence in these matters. It is often contrived." Poirot crouched low to the floor, examining small scuff marks. Some appeared to be ordinary wear from the factory staff moving crates, but others were oddly shaped, as though boots had been altered, soles roughened to disguise a tread. "Mon Dieu," Poirot said softly. "The murderer anticipated observation, yes, but a detail has slipped, one that may reveal their presence and intent." Hastings pointed to a faint scent lingering near the far end of the warehouse. "Poirot, do you smell that? It's faint, almost sweet, and unusual for a place like this." Poirot inhaled delicately, closing his eyes. "Ah, yes, mon ami. Bitter almonds. The faint trace of cyanide or a chemical designed to mimic it. Very clever. Perhaps a threat, perhaps an attempt to mislead. Yet it is a trace nonetheless, and it speaks of intent, not accident." As they continued their inspection, Poirot noticed a partially torn piece of paper tucked between two crates. Carefully retrieving it, he smoothed it out. It appeared to be a shipping record, yet certain entries had been abbreviated unusually, numbers slightly altered. "Hastings, observe this. Not only does it contain factual information, but it has been tampered with. A subtle form of deception. Someone sought to confuse investigators, yet in doing so, reveals a meticulous mind." Poirot then turned his attention to the warehouse's machinery. Looms, presses, and workbenches stood idle, dust settling in layers. Yet certain pieces bore recent marks, a footprint on the edge of a metal press, smudges of blue dye along a loom's base, and faint scratches that suggested movement. Poirot crouched beside one of the looms, tracing the scratches. Someone moved this deliberately. Perhaps to suggest a struggle occurred here. Or perhaps to misdirect us from the true scene. Clever, but the hand leaves its signature. Hastings looked puzzled. Poirot, how can you be certain which traces are genuine and which are meant to mislead? Poirot smiled, tapping his moustache. Mon ami, deception always leaves a rhythm, a pattern. The genuine traces obey the laws of physics and human behavior. The false traces they are chaotic, awkward, imperfect. One must discern the rhythm, and then the deception becomes clear. The afternoon wore on, and Poirot's investigation grew more intricate. He discovered another curious detail, a set of footprints leading to a small side door, partially concealed by a stack of crates. The prints were small and shallow, unlike Doyle's heavier boots, yet they suggested deliberate movement, someone entering or leaving without drawing attention. Opportunity, Hastings, Poirot murmured. The murderer needed access, and this path provided it. Yet notice the care, a deliberate attempt to avoid obvious traces. Poirot paused and crouched near a faint, oily stain on the floor. He sniffed carefully. A motor oil. Recently applied. Perhaps a spill during hurried movement, or perhaps left intentionally. In any case, it is a mark of activity, human activity, that must be reconciled with statements made earlier. Red herrings were also present, woven expertly by the murderer. A bundle of rags, apparently discarded carelessly, contained no evidence, yet drew attention from the investigators. A crate labeled inaccurately suggested movement where none had occurred. Even the faint scent of bitter almonds, while real, might have been intended as a distraction from the actual scene of the murder. Poirot observed each of these with a patient, unwavering focus, mentally cataloguing which elements were genuine clues and which were designed to mislead. By mid-afternoon, Poirot felt he had a preliminary understanding. Hastings, note the cleverness of the plan. The murderer has created layers of visible, chaotic scene to attract attention, and subtle details, blue dye, scuff marks, traces of chemical, to confuse. Yet beneath these layers lies the truth. And we shall uncover it, yes, we shall. He returned once more to the body of Mr. Ashford, noting the slight bruising along the forearms and the faint discoloration beneath the fingernails. Hastings, the struggle was brief, sudden, yet not entirely passive. Our victim tried to resist, but the assailant acted with swiftness and calculation. Notice also the ladder, fallen but not damaged in haste. Its placement is deliberate, intended to mislead observers regarding the exact location and time of the attack. Poirot's sharp eyes caught something else, a faint indentation in the dust near the far wall, barely discernible, yet enough to suggest the presence of a small object. Kneeling, he carefully lifted what appeared to be a tiny metallic key. This, mon ami, may unlock secrets yet unrevealed. A hidden compartment, a drawer, a box perhaps. The key itself is innocent, yet it speaks of concealment, intent, and opportunity. Hastings shook his head in amazement. Poirot, how do you notice so much? It's all so subtle. Poirot smiled serenely. Hastings, it is not merely notice, it is interpretation. One observes not only with the eyes but with the mind. Each mark, each smell, each small detail is a word in a story. Our task is to read it. By the end of the day, Poirot had catalogued dozens of subtle clues, layered them against statements made by the suspects, and mentally constructed a map of the warehouse that integrated opportunity, motive, and misdirection. He understood that the murderer was clever, precise, and possibly aided unwittingly by the staff. Yet, as ever, Poirot's patient mind found a rhythm in the chaos, a pattern in the seeming disorder. He paused at the warehouse entrance, surveying the scene once more. Hastings, the human mind is a remarkable instrument. The murderer has acted, yes, but left a trail nonetheless. Small, delicate, and intricate, but visible to those who observe with care. We must now consider these traces alongside motive and opportunity. Only then will the truth emerge. The detective adjusted his bowler hat, straightened his coat, and began to plan the next phase: interviews with each suspect, careful probing of alibis, and the delicate unearthing of concealed truths. The warehouse, once merely a storage space, had transformed under Poirot's gaze into a landscape of secrets and deception, each clue a stepping stone toward revelation. An Hercule Poirot, methodical, elegant, and unerring in observation, was ready to follow those stones to the ultimate truth, wherever they might lead. Chapter 5: Secrets Beneath the Surface. The evening had descended over London, draping the city in a muted twilight that seeped into every corner of the Eldridge and Company warehouse. The factory yard outside was silent, save for the distant echo of a carriage and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Inside, Poirot moved with the same deliberate, elegant precision that marked every investigation he undertook. Each step, each gesture, each glance was part of a careful orchestration of observation. Hastings walked alongside him, slightly weary from the long day of interviews, yet still alert to Poirot's comments. "It seems the closer we get to the truth, the more tangled everything becomes," he said quietly. "I thought we were making progress today, but I feel as though every clue just raises more questions." Poirot smiled faintly, adjusting his bowler hat. "Ah, Hastings, mon ami, that is the nature of human affairs. The more clever the mind, the deeper the concealment. But the little grey cells never tire. Patience, observation, and reflection, these are our allies." The detective led Hastings back into the office where the suspects had been gathered. Each now seemed more wary, the events of the day weighing heavily upon them. Poirot's gaze swept the room like a delicate instrument, noting subtle shifts in posture, fleeting expressions, and tiny gestures that betrayed inattentions. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, his voice calm yet commanding, "yesterday evening, something occurred here that disrupted the ordinary rhythm of this factory. I must ask again, with greater care, about your movements, your knowledge, and your concerns. Nothing is too small to matter." He turned first to Mrs. Clara Ashford. Her composure remained elegant, but Poirot's keen eyes noticed a subtle change, a slight tightening around the eyes, a micro-tremor in the fingers as she adjusted her gloves. "Madam Ashford," he said gently, "you knew Leonard well. Did you ever suspect, at any time, that he might have been concerned about something unusual? Perhaps some matter of finance, of personnel, or of property?" Mrs. Ashford hesitated, her eyes flicking to the side. "Well, he did mention some irregularities in the accounts. But I assumed they were minor, easily corrected. He never seemed unduly worried." Poirot's fingers pressed lightly together, a gesture he often used when mulling over a subtle clue. "Ah, irregularities. Small in appearance, perhaps, but capable of producing significant consequences. Did Leonard confide in anyone else?" "No, not really. Only, perhaps Thomas Greaves. He trusted him to oversee the accounts while he attended to other matters." Poirot nodded slowly. "Interesting, and Thomas, you were aware of this?" Greaves stiffened, a flicker of discomfort crossing his otherwise confident expression. "Yes. I was aware. But I had no reason to be concerned. Leonard managed the finances carefully." Poirot's eyes were sharp as a hawk. "And yet, when a man manages finances carefully, he also observes irregularities. Is it not reasonable to suggest that Leonard may have discovered something troubling, something worth hiding?" Greaves' jaw tightened, but he offered no immediate response. Poirot turned to Margaret Linton, the sempstress, whose bright eyes now reflected curiosity mixed with apprehension. "Margaret, you work closely with the materials and shipments. Did you notice anything unusual, missing items, discrepancies, or items moved out of sequence?" Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "Well, there were some bales that arrived late last week." Nothing unusual, really, just delays. Why would that matter? Poirot's gaze lingered on her cuff, where he had earlier noted the faint blue dye smudge. The matter of delay is rarely without reason. Some men, or women, may exploit delays to conceal actions. Tell me, Margaret, were any shipments ever unaccounted for? Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the edge of her apron. I think there were a few, but Leonard always handled it. I was never certain. Poirot smiled subtly, inwardly noting the small confession. Even uncertainty can be revealing. Hastings, observe how hesitation often betrays the hidden knowledge. Margaret knows more than she admits, though perhaps unconsciously. Finally, Poirot faced Samuel Doyle, the night watchman. His broad frame seemed even more imposing in the dim light, but his eyes darted nervously. Doyle, you were on duty last night. Were all the entrances secure? Did you hear anything, steps, voices, disturbances? Doyle swallowed hard. I thought everything was normal. I was asleep most of the night. I didn't hear anything unusual. Poirot raised a single finger, his gaze steady. You were asleep, yet evidence suggests movement near the side door. Footprints that do not match your boots. Explain this, Doyle. Doyle's eyes widened, and he fidgeted with the edge of his coat. I don't know. Maybe someone passed by? I didn't see them. I swear I didn't leave my post. Poirot tapped his moustache thoughtfully. Opportunity alone does not prove guilt. Yet fear, Doyle, fear often disguises knowledge. I must ask, did you know of any tensions among the staff, any matters of jealousy, ambition, or resentment? Doyle hesitated, then muttered, there's friction. Greaves has ambitions. Margaret, she's vocal about management. And Mrs. Ashford, she sometimes questions Leonard's decisions. Poirot's eyes glimmered with satisfaction. Every statement, every hesitation, every small revelation formed threads of a tapestry, invisible to all but him. Hastings, mon ami, the heart of the matter lies not in the obvious, but in the concealed. Observe the contradictions, the subtle fears, the small admissions. They are all pieces of a puzzle that is slowly revealing its pattern. The detective returned to the body of Mr. Ashford, crouching to examine a faint indentation near the edge of the crates. A small metallic key lay partially hidden under the dust, a discovery Poirot had made earlier but had kept close to study in context with his interviews. Of a hidden compartment, yes. Letters, accounts, secrets perhaps. The victim discovered something threatening, and someone acted to prevent revelation. Hastings peered over Poirot's shoulder. Do you think it was someone in this room? Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Mon ami, the mind that acts to conceal often leaves traces among familiar faces. Opportunity, motive, and subtle traces, yes, all are present. But the truth requires careful weaving of all threads, not hasty judgment. Poirot then asked each suspect to recount their evening once more, seeking small inconsistencies and micro-expressions. Mrs. Ashford's gaze briefly faltered when she mentioned retiring early. Greaves hesitated over the exact time of his inventory checks. Margaret Linton's hands trembled as she spoke of the late bails. Doyle avoided eye contact, muttering vague statements about patrols. Each tiny inconsistency, though seemingly innocuous, was a subtle chink in the armor of concealment. Finally, Poirot gathered them together. Miss Amis, secrets are powerful. They motivate, they frighten, they deceive. Yet they also leave traces, subtle yet detectable. The little grey cells see what is invisible, understand what is concealed, and untangle the web of human motives. One day soon, the truth will emerge. Patience is required, yet every day brings us closer. The suspects left the office quietly, unsettled by Poirot's calm authority and piercing observation. Hastings lingered, watching his friend. "Poirot, it's remarkable. You seem to know more after talking to them for hours than we've learned from evidence alone." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, Hastings, the mind is a labyrinth, yet its corridors reveal themselves if one walks slowly and observes. The warehouse, the body, the traces, the words, all speak. One must listen carefully, for the truth hides in whispers, not shouts." As evening settled over the factory, Poirot remained, studying the warehouse floor, the fallen ladder, the smudges of dye, the key, and the faint traces of chemical scent. Each was a clue, a thread, a fragment of a story waiting to be woven together. And Poirot knew that by the morrow, these threads would form the pattern revealing the murderer, subtle, clever, and perhaps unexpectedly close at hand. Chapter 6. The plot thickens. The morning after his meticulous interviews, Hercule Poirot returned to the Eldridge and Company warehouse with an air of serene determination. The sky was still grey, but the day's light filtered through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes that floated lazily above the stacks of crates. Hastings followed, noticeably tense. "Poirot, I feel the puzzle is becoming more tangled with every revelation. There are too many contradictions, too many potential motives. How can we possibly know where to begin?" Poirot adjusted his bowler hat, a faint smile curling beneath his meticulously groomed moustache. "Ah, Hastings, it is precisely the contradictions that illuminate the path. Inconsistencies are never accidental. They are the echoes of concealed truths, and it is our task to interpret them with the precision of a surgeon. Observation is not merely noticing, it is understanding the rhythm beneath appearances." The detective began a slow, deliberate inspection of the warehouse, retracing his steps from the previous day. Each crate, each smudge, each indentation in the dusty floor was a word in the silent testimony of human actions. Poirot's eyes flicked to the ladder lying near the center of the warehouse. Mon Dieu, the position, the angle, the subtle scratches along the floorboards. Someone moved it deliberately, perhaps to stage the scene, perhaps to obscure the true sequence of events. Hastings watched him, uneasily. "You believe the killer planned this? Even the ladder?" "Mais oui, Hastings," Poirot replied, tapping his fingers together. "A clever mind leaves no detail to chance. The ladder, the chemical scent, the dye, all are part of a narrative designed to mislead, yet they also betray the mind that created them." Poirot returned to the scene of the body, crouching beside Mr. Ashford's still form. The slight bruising along his forearms, the subtle discoloration under his fingernails, and the orientation of his head were details he had noted previously. Now, he considered them in the context of the interviews conducted the night before. A pattern began to emerge. "The struggle," Poirot murmured, "was brief. Our victim was surprised, taken unaware, yet he attempted resistance. The assailant anticipated his actions. Every step, every object moved, every smudge left behind was intentional. Ah, the mind of the murderer is both cunning and precise." Hastings frowned. "But who could have such foresight? The suspects we have, Greaves, Margaret, Doyle, Mrs. Ashford, they all seem ordinary, though each has motives, perhaps. But this is sophistication." Poirot tapped his moustache thoughtfully. "Hastings, the ordinary mind often acts out of desperation. Cleverness need not be extraordinary, it need only exploit opportunity, predict behavior, and manipulate appearances. And in that, the ordinary can be extraordinary indeed." The detective then turned his attention to the blue dye smudge on Margaret's cuff, revisiting it with careful examination. "Hastings, the location of this smudge is curious. It suggests movement near the crates, perhaps in haste or perhaps in deliberate misdirection. Margaret, knowingly or not, has provided a clue, small, subtle, yet meaningful. Perhaps she brushed against a crate during normal work, perhaps at the moment the plan was executed. We must keep this in mind. Poirot rose and approached the faint trail of footprints leading to the side door. Their shallow depth suggested a lighter individual or someone taking care to avoid heavy pressure. R.C. Hastings, the murderer, has exploited routine. The side door is used rarely, mostly by senior staff. The footprints were created with intent, yet almost imperceptibly. This is not happenstance. Opportunity, again, is deliberate. Poirot then carefully examined the faint scent of bitter almonds lingering near a stack of crates. The chemical, subtle, almost imperceptible, is a diversion or a warning. It speaks to planning, to premeditation. Our assailant wished to mislead, yes, or perhaps intimidate. But it also indicates familiarity with dangerous substances, with the effects they create. A mind both practical and daring. Hastings shifted uncomfortably. Poirot, it seems almost impossible to tell the genuine clues from the red herrings. How can we know what matters? Poirot smiled faintly. Hastings, that is why observation must be coupled with psychology. The criminal may mislead the body, the scene, the objects, but the mind betrays itself. Every hesitation, every micro-expression, every slight inconsistency is a thread. And from these threads, one can weave a tapestry of truth. To deepen his investigation, Poirot began a more thorough review of each suspect's known behavior and personal circumstances. He considered Thomas Greaves' ambition, noting the small tremor in his fingers during questioning, his careful insistence on the inventory timeline, and his subtle defensiveness when financial irregularities were mentioned. Ambition can motivate acts otherwise unconceivable, Poirot murmured. Mrs. Ashford's elegant composure suggested control, yet her micro-tremors and brief glances toward the key he had discovered yesterday indicated knowledge she sought to conceal. Margaret's nervousness, paired with her familiarity with the crates, suggested she could have moved among them without arousing suspicion, though whether with intent or by accident remained unclear. Doyle's avoidance of eye contact, his vague account of the night, and his defensive responses suggested fear, perhaps of accusation, perhaps of revealing hidden knowledge. Poirot then turned his attention to a small metallic key he had discovered earlier. It had been partially concealed beneath dust near the far crates. Hastings, this key, it is deliberate placement, yes. Whoever placed it here sought either to hide or to manipulate. Perhaps it opens a drawer, a compartment, a document box, something that holds secrets Leonard Ashford discovered, secrets that someone wished to suppress. The detective walked slowly across the warehouse, reviewing the scattered crates, the smudges, and the subtle disturbances of the floor. Each element now seemed part of an intricate plan, the ladder to mislead, the die to implicate or confuse, the footprints to suggest presence yet obscure identity, the chemical sent to intimidate or distract. Hastings, mon ami, the murderer, is clever. Not merely in physical execution, but in psychological orchestration. They understand how fear, misdirection, and uncertainty work upon the human mind. Observe, yes, but interpret. Poirot paused near a stack of crates along the wall, noticing slight abrasions in the wood that suggested a box had been moved or tampered with recently. He knelt to examine it, carefully tracing the markings with his gloved fingers. See here. The assailant was meticulous, yet overlooked the simplest traces, the scratches in the wood, the subtle displacement. This is how human error reveals intent, even when genius designs the scene. Hastings shook his head in admiration. Poirot, it's remarkable. Each time I think I understand, another detail emerges that changes everything. Poirot smiled serenely. Yes, Hastings. The puzzle is never fully visible until one steps back and considers all its pieces. Observe how the murderer left not only physical traces but psychological cues, small inconsistencies in statements, subtle hesitations, and unconscious admissions. These, combined with the physical evidence, form a path leading inexorably to the truth. As the afternoon progressed, Poirot summoned the suspects for a brief re-interview, focusing on subtle contradictions he had noted during observation. Greaves' account of inventory times wavered under gentle questioning. Margaret admitted, albeit indirectly, that she had been near the crates around the approximate time of the murder, brushing against one in nervous haste. Doyle, pressed lightly, admitted faint recollection of movement near the side door, though carefully avoiding any implication of wrongdoing. Mrs. Ashford's eyes flickered when asked about the ledger and her awareness of financial irregularities. Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, weaving these elements together. Hastings, observe how motives, opportunity, and human fear intersect. Each individual is a thread in the web, yet one thread is stronger, more deliberate, and woven with intention. As evening approached, Poirot took a final survey of the warehouse, now quiet and still. The day's discoveries had clarified much, yet the full picture remained hidden. Subtle clues had been uncovered, contradictions highlighted, and psychological threads noted, but the solution required patience and synthesis. Hastings, Poirot said softly, the plot thickens. But every day brings the pattern closer to revelation. The murderer has acted, but not perfectly. The little grey cells shall illuminate the path, and soon all will be understood. With that, Poirot and Hastings departed, leaving the warehouse and its secrets behind, though not for long. Poirot's mind already worked on arranging the threads, preparing for the next stage of interviews and evidence gathering that would bring the hidden motives, concealed actions, and ultimate truth to light. Chapter 7: The Confounding Twist. The next morning, the sky over London was an austere sheet of grey, the kind of weather that seemed to press upon the city with quiet insistence. Inside the warehouse of Eldridge and Company, Hercule Poirot moved with the deliberate elegance that had earned him his reputation, his eyes darting from crate to crate, each surface, each mark, as though the walls themselves might speak. Hastings followed closely, a mixture of awe and trepidation evident on his face. Poirot, Hastings said softly, I confess I am confused. Each day we uncover a detail, yet they seem to contradict one another. The ladder, the footprints, the dye, the chemical traces, how are we to make sense of it? Poirot paused and adjusted his bowler hat, the corners of his moustache twitching in thought. Ah, Hastings, contradictions are not a confusion, they are a guide. When carefully observed, inconsistencies illuminate the hidden design. The mind that seeks to deceive leaves traces, yes, but also errors. The key is to find the logic beneath the apparent chaos. The detective approached the central stack of crates, where he had discovered the faint smudge of blue dye the previous day. He crouched and traced the pattern with a gloved finger. Ah, notice, Hastings. The smudge's directionality suggests movement not by accident, but intentional, yet the assailant was unaware of the exact observational angles. Small detail, perhaps, yet vital. It shows presence and timing. Hastings frowned. So Margaret's smudge, it implicates her. Poirot shook his head slowly. Not necessarily, mon ami. It indicates opportunity, yes, and proximity. But motive, intention, and the orchestration of deception must also be considered. We must not confuse coincidence with guilt. Poirot then moved to the ladder, now upright against a stack of crates, and studied the scratches along the floor beneath it. Hastings, note the subtle displacement here. The ladder was moved to create a misperception of struggle. Observe the orientation, too precise for an accident. The murderer attempted to create a false narrative, yet in doing so, left a telltale signature. Hastings muttered, it's almost like a performance. Exactment. Poirot exclaimed, his eyes sparkling. Crime is often theatrical. The clever murderer stages the scene, anticipates observation, and hopes to control perception. But perception is never perfect. The mind that observes with rigor reveals inconsistencies, and therein lies the path to truth. Poirot walked over to the faint trail of footprints leading to the side door. He knelt and traced them with a finger, noting the shallow depth and the deliberate care in placement. See here. These prints were created to suggest entry from outside. Yet their shallow depth indicates caution, almost timidity. Someone familiar with the warehouse used the doorway, not as a stranger, but as one accustomed to the space. Hastings' brow furrowed. Doyle? He's the night watchman. He would know the building well. Poirot's eyes, sharp and calculating, met Hastings'. Perhaps. Yet familiarity alone does not indicate guilt. One must consider motive and psychological behavior. Doyle exhibits fear, yes, but fear can disguise knowledge rather than culpability. Observe how he avoids direct statements, how he hesitates, how his eyes flit. That is the language of a mind burdened by uncertainty, not necessarily malice. Poirot then turned to the ledger discovered in Leonard Ashford's office, now brought before him. He examined the entries with meticulous care, noting small discrepancies in the accounting. Certain shipments were logged at odd times, amounts slightly altered. R.C. Hastings. These subtle alterations suggest concealment. Leonard may have discovered financial irregularities and intended to confront someone. The murderer anticipated this, yet left behind physical traces in the warehouse. Small traces, yes, but revealing. He carefully reviewed his notes from the suspect interviews, comparing gestures, expressions, and statements. Margaret Linton's nervousness, her smudge of dye, her fleeting admission of being near the crates, all indicated proximity. Thomas Greaves' defensiveness and concern about financial oversight hinted at motive. Mrs. Ashford's poise, contrasted with micro-tremors and fleeting glances at the ledger, suggested knowledge she did not fully disclose. Doyle's avoidance and partial admissions indicated fear or partial knowledge. Poirot stood and surveyed the warehouse as though seeing it anew. Hastings observed the interconnectedness. Opportunity, motive, and psychological behavior intersect. Yet there is an element unexpected, a confounding twist. Someone sought to mislead us by staging false evidence, the ladder, the dye, the chemical scent. But misdirection always leaves a subtle rhythm. A mind cannot fully conceal patterns without error. Poirot motioned to a stack of crates along the far wall. Here is an overlooked detail. He lifted a small, almost imperceptible slip of paper wedged between crates. It contained a brief note: "Tonight, the accounts must be corrected, or consequences follow." The handwriting was deliberate but hurried. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "See, Hastings. Here is the motive: fear of exposure." Someone knew Leonard had discovered irregularities. They acted swiftly, preemptively, and attempted to stage the scene to confuse observation. Yet the language of fear betrays intention. Hastings leaned closer. So it was planned, then? Not a crime of passion. Poirot shook his head. Clever, yes. Calculated. Deliberate. Not passion but premeditation. The assailant understood opportunity, timing, and the human mind. That is why every detail matters: the ladder, the footprints, the dye, the chemical scent. All are elements of psychological orchestration. Poirot then asked for the suspects to be brought before him once more. He began with careful questioning, observing the smallest reactions. Mrs. Ashford's voice remained calm, yet her hands twisted the edge of her gloves. Greaves, confronted with discrepancies in his statements, displayed micro-expressions of tension. Margaret Linton's eyes widened when asked about the note, and Doyle shifted uneasily, unable to maintain a composed stance. Poirot's gaze shifted from one to another. "Miss Amis, we are now closer to understanding the hidden pattern. opportunity, motive, fear, and psychological manipulation intersect. Each of you has been observed carefully, and contradictions have been noted. The murderer has acted to mislead, but human nature always leaves traces. Even the most careful planning cannot erase subtle truths, the rhythm of hesitation, the tremor of a hand, the glance diverted. He paused, tapping his moustache. The confounding twist, Hastings, is this: the murderer attempted to implicate more than one person. The ladder, the footprints, the chemical scent, all point to multiple actors, yet the pattern is singular. One mind orchestrates all. The web is tangled, yes, but the threads converge upon a single origin. Poirot's little grey cells had been at work tirelessly. He considered the timeline, the psychological profiles, and the physical traces in the warehouse. He reviewed each clue: the blue dye smudge, the faint chemical scent, the ladder's deliberate placement, the small metallic key, and the cryptic note. Slowly, methodically, the pieces began to form a coherent pattern. Hastings, sensing Poirot's intensity, whispered, "Do you know who it is?" Poirot's eyes glimmered, but he did not reveal the answer. "Not yet, Hastings. But we are at the threshold. Tomorrow, we shall see the unraveling of the pattern, and the threads of human deceit shall be revealed. The confounding twist is that the murderer is not obvious, yet the evidence, subtle and precise, points unerringly toward them. Patience, Hastings, the final act approaches." As evening settled over the factory, Poirot remained, reviewing every trace, every statement, and every detail in his mind. He understood the web of deception that had been spun, complex, deliberate, yet not flawless. The confounding twist, the clever orchestration, had created the illusion of chaos, but beneath it all, a single mind had left traces subtle enough for only the keenest observation to detect. An Hercule Poirot, patient, elegant, and unerring in perception, was ready to bring the threads together in the final, decisive revelation. The murderer's identity, the motive, and the sequence of events were all poised on the edge of disclosure. Chapter 8: The Revelation. The warehouse of Eldridge and Company had taken on an almost theatrical atmosphere by the following morning. The suspects, Thomas Greaves, Margaret Linton, Samuel Doyle, and Mrs. Clara Ashford, had been summoned once more, each with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Poirot, as ever, stood at the centre of the room, his posture impeccable, his little grey cells poised for the final act. Hastings, standing discreetly to the side, sensed the tension in the air. It was the sort of quiet expectancy that precedes revelation. Poirot raised a hand to command attention. "Miss Amiss, thank you for returning. Today, we shall conclude the investigation into the untimely death of Mr. Leonard Ashford. We shall examine, in order, the events, the evidence, and the minds involved. And at the end, the truth will be revealed, in all its complexity and precision." He began with a careful recounting of the warehouse scene, pointing to the crates, the ladder, and the faint smudges of blue dye. "Observe these elements. They were not accidental. The ladder, positioned to suggest a struggle, the footprints leading to the side door, deliberately placed to suggest a different narrative, the chemical scent, bitter almonds, intended as misdirection. Every trace, every movement, was orchestrated to confuse the observer." Hastings leaned forward. "But Poirot, how could anyone manage all that so cleverly?" Poirot's moustache twitched. Hastings, cleverness alone is insufficient. One must understand opportunity, human behavior, and the manipulation of perception. And now, Miss Amiss, we shall examine the motives." He turned first to Thomas Greaves. "You, assistant manager, ambitious and diligent, had oversight of the accounts. Leonard discovered financial irregularities, small, yes, but significant. You feared exposure, and this fear forms the first thread of our web." Greaves' face paled slightly. "Detective, I did notice the discrepancies, yes, but I—" Poirot raised a hand gently. Patience, Thomas. You acted not in anger, but in careful calculation. Yet your hesitation yesterday revealed your anxiety. You feared loss, yes, but opportunity alone does not make guilt. Poirot then turned to Margaret Linton. Margaret, your position among the bales and crates gave you proximity to the scene. The smudge of dye upon your cuff suggests you brushed against a crate at a critical moment. Yet, this is not evidence of guilt, it is opportunity, yes, but context matters. Your nervousness revealed knowledge, but not necessarily action. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she nodded. I only moved about the crates as part of my work. I swear I did not. Poirot's gaze shifted to Doyle, the night watchman. Doyle, your footprints were noted near the side door. You avoided direct eye contact and hesitated when questioned. Fear, yes, but not malice. You observed, perhaps even suspected, but did not act. Doyle exhaled with relief. I didn't touch anything. I swear. Poirot's eyes now rested on Mrs. Ashford, who had remained composed, almost too composed, throughout the investigation. And now, Madam Ashford. Here lies the truth, subtle yet undeniable. Leonard discovered irregularities, yes, but more than that, he discovered knowledge you wish to conceal. Not merely finance, but personal secrets, matters that could disrupt appearances and control. You acted swiftly, not in a fit of passion, but with careful premeditation. Mrs. Ashford's lips parted, a faint tremor betraying her otherwise calm exterior. Detective. I did not kill him. You must be mistaken. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his voice calm but commanding. Madam, observe the evidence. The small metallic key, found beneath the crates, opens a compartment containing letters and financial documents. Documents that Leonard had begun to reconcile. You knew of their existence and acted to prevent discovery. The chemical scent, the staged ladder, the misleading footprints, these were all deliberate attempts to misdirect. Yet, as all human deception does, they leave traces only the observant can detect. He walked slowly toward the key, holding it aloft for all to see. This key, minor in appearance, is central to the crime. Placed carelessly in the dust, it was overlooked, yet it spoke volumes. It revealed your presence, madam, at the crucial moment. The micro-tremors of your hands when questioned, the fleeting glances at the ledger, the careful orchestration of appearances, all these were threads in the web you spun. Mrs. Ashford's composure finally cracked, her voice trembling. I only wanted to prevent scandal. I didn't mean for him to die. Poirot inclined his head with understanding, though his eyes were unwavering. Ah, madam, the mind that plots concealment can sometimes misjudge the force of action. You acted swiftly, to prevent exposure, yet underestimated human intervention, the struggle, the ladder, the unintentional traces. And so, tragedy occurred. Hastings whispered to Poirot, incredulous. It was her? But how could she manage everything without being noticed? Poirot smiled faintly. Hastings, control, precision, and knowledge of the environment. She had opportunity, motive, and the cleverness to orchestrate a deceptive scene. Yet she underestimated the power of subtle traces, inconsistencies, and human observation. That is why even the most meticulous plans cannot escape the little grey cells. Poirot now turned to the assembled suspects collectively. Miss Amis, observe the lesson here. Crime is not merely physical action. It is psychological orchestration, manipulation of perception, and exploitation of opportunity. Yet human nature is rarely perfect. Fear, hesitation, micro-expressions, and overlooked details all betray even the cleverest mind. The murderer may think themselves invisible, but truth has its way of revealing itself. He gestured toward the warehouse floor, indicating the ladder, the smudges of blue dye, the faint chemical scent. Every object here, every subtle trace, is part of the narrative. They are not meaningless, they are chapters in the story of that night. Leonard Ashford's death was swift, deliberate, unplanned. Yet the traces left behind, subtle yet revealing, point to the orchestrator, Mrs. Clara Ashford. The room fell silent, save for Mrs. Ashford's shaky breaths and the quiet ticking of a distant clock. Poirot's voice, calm yet filled with authority, concluded the unravelling. Justice will be served not merely because of observation, but because the human mind, in its imperfections, reveals its secrets. And now, the truth is known. Margaret Linton exhaled softly, relief evident. It's tragic, but I suppose it had to be uncovered. Greaves nodded, his face pale but resolute. I suppose we were all manipulated by appearances. I never suspected her, not until now. Doyle simply shook his head, still recovering from the tension. I didn't know. I just thought I saw shadows. Poirot, satisfied that the web had been fully untangled, turned to Hastings with a faint smile. Hastings, observe how methodical observation, patient reasoning, and the understanding of human psychology illuminate even the most intricate deception. The truth is always there, hidden in whispers, not shouts. And the little grey cells reveal it. Hastings, shaking his head in amazement, murmured, Poirot, you make it seem so simple, yet it is anything but. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of quiet satisfaction. Simplicity, Hastings, is the result of order imposed upon chaos. The mind, like the warehouse, may appear disorderly. Yet every detail, every trace, every hesitation, is a step toward understanding. That is the art of detection. And so, in the quiet of the warehouse, with sunlight glimmering faintly through the dusty windows, the mystery of Leonard Ashford's death was resolved. The murderer's clever orchestration had been revealed, the motives understood, and the subtle traces that betrayed the crime carefully traced by the unparalleled brilliance of Hercule Poirot. Justice, subtle and precise, had been served.